Welcome back to The Line. New Mexico's Republican leaders are taking to the oil fields in the state's Permian Basin in an effort to register Hispanic voters. This is part of an aggressive strategy to win over Hispanic and Native American voters, not only in southern New Mexico, but throughout the state. And Diane, Steve Pearce, chair of the Republican Party of New Mexico, has staked his reputation on a statewide effort that he wants to have all 33 counties have representatives for Hispanic and Native American recruitment. But let's talk about this Permian Basin thing. It seems kind of an interesting strategy. The ask seems pretty simple. You know, we're the GOP party of the energy business, so protect your own interests.
Well, I quite truthfully, as somebody who has for years and years and years helped do voter registration for various groups or locations, the state fair, all these kinds of places.
Sure.
I was going, darn, that's a good idea, because it's like some people have said, oh, well, they're targeting, they want to be Republicans. Well, the law says if the person being registered wants to register as an independent or a declined estate or a Democrat, they must be registered that way.
Right.
And that's fine. But it's like, say, in Albuquerque, if you are a Republican group, you don't go to a supermarket in the South Valley and sit out front and hope you're going to get a bunch of Republicans to
or
register.
On campus, or,
Oh, yeah. So you go to supermarkets or Walmart or Target or whatever in the Northeast Heights. So it's, to me, I'm going, that's a very simple strategy.
Yeah.
There's nothing illegal with it. And I think the reaction from the Democrats is, darn, why didn't we think of that? So, but I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And I think it's a fair, normal part of the process. And if we can get more people registered, Democrats or Republicans or declined estates, I don't care.
Good point there. Interestingly, Dan, the official word is they're not leaning on anyone to be a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. It's just you get to freely choose. But, I mean, it would seem pretty simple that they're looking for Republican.
It's interesting that we're having this conversation when every time the AFL-CIO, AFL-CIO, or any of the collective bargaining organizations or the AFSCME meets, I'm not sure they're extending invitations to Republicans to come in and offer an opportunity to their members to be enrolled.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's, as long as you're not breaking the law. I think the bigger story, back on, what I said earlier about the whole issue, the state representative who's out working on behalf of the party registering the Hispanics for the Republican Party is the individual taking on the sitting state senator. Right. So it's an interesting
Mr. Gallegos.
Mr. Gallegos,
David Gallegos.
It's an interesting it's an interesting coordinated effort. It looks like to do this. Look, I think the Republican Party, at some point, there's no doubt that the Republican Party has been working to attract people of color and minorities. And, I think getting people to register because you show up at their safety meeting is one thing. Getting them turn out to listen to what your issues are and vote is another. And I think that, when the party keeps, pushing out there a bunch of, 70-year-old rich white guys and saying, we're the ones to tell you how to do this, I'm not sure it's really going to play well for the party long term. And we're missing many opportunities to attract folks and talk about the issues and staying away from the identity politics. But we just can't seem to, miss the opportunity.
These days, that's hard to avoid, no matter what you do. Christine, what's interesting when you think about, Lee County had a 40% turnout. That's just not going to work if you're on a Republican. Eddy County barely cracked 50% when you think about this. Something had to change if you're on the Republican side of things.
Maybe your candidates?
Yeah, but, well, there you go. Fair enough.
Well, I find this fascinating. I am a proponent of democratic participation with a small d. And so I'm delighted to see that actually the parties may be in competition to engage in voter enhancement as opposed to voter suppression. It's wonderful to not have to talk about voter suppression and actually debate on how we're going to go out and enfranchise more and more people, because I think an expanded electorate is a great thing. Having said that, I also think that the Republicans have their work cut out for them, because it's going to be quite complicated. Interesting, oil field workers, what immediate came to my mind is how much of them are a transient population? Are they non-residents? Are they non-citizens? There may be very well some folks who are undocumented or live in mixed status families.
Right.
And all of this is going to be very complicated in terms of both, as Dan mentioned, a two-step process. Registration, but then turnout and persuasion to vote for your candidates.
Right.
And so even having said that, the bottom line in New Mexico, as a matter of fact, nationally is that Hispanics tend to vote for the Democratic Party candidates. That's still the case. In 2018, we saw that big time. The increasing electorate is declined to state or independent, but you still have to convince then a whole lot of folks not only to register, turn out, and vote for your candidate.
Good points there. You know, Julianne, when you think about it too, President Trump has made his intentions clear about New Mexico. You look at the 3 GOP folks running for CD2 down there, their allegiance to Mr. Trump is pretty solid. They're not shying away from him at all. Does that cloud any of this? Not cloud, maybe not a good word there, but does that impact any of this as we go along here? Sorry about that, any Trump supporters?
I
Sorry
think I
about
have to agree that as a journalist, I think it's very important for people with all kinds of political views and no views, people who are still learning, to get involved and register to vote and take a serious look at the issues in their community.
Right.
And yes, in that part of New Mexico, particularly the Permian Basin versus, the Four Corners area, down there in the south, there is a contested congressional race that's coming. But, we were kind of kicking around all the people have been talking about this for a while, that the, Xochitl Torres Small, who won that race, has done a good job representing that district in Congress so far. She hasn't gotten herself in trouble. She's said that she's opposed to an outright ban on fracking, which, positions her in that community. And so, the GOP has an uphill battle, and they've got 3 candidates sort of, going at it for the primary so far. So I think it is a pretty complicated situation down there. The other thing that's interesting to me is that Steve Pearce is the Republican Party chairman right now. He's very familiar with the people who work in the oil fields and the managers of the large companies that make the money down there. This is where Steve Pearce earned his wealth before and during his time in Congress. And so, if anybody knows how to rally that constituency, it could be him.
Any danger or any thought that, on Christine's point, that there may in fact be some, I'm just going to say it, illegal folks, undocumented folks that might turn out to be on the Republican side of the registry?
I think that might be the first time it happened in New Mexico.
I don't think so, but wouldn't that be kind of a mess for Republicans, though? There's always
Sure. The thing about it, though, is you're taking the word. We have made it so simple to register to vote. You don't have to prove who you are at all. So the registrar is taking the word of this individual that I am a citizen, that I am doing, and this is my home address. So it's not the registrar, therefore, i.e. the Republican Party. It would not be any more than it would be the Democrat Party.
Okay.
Unless they deliberately knew it.
And Gina, I would tell you that, in a disclaimer, working in my work capacity, we work with oil and gas stuff. You're probably going to be less likely to get illegal immigrants. Those requirements to get on those sites, pretty stringent.
Are they?
I'm I'm not saying it doesn't happen.
Yeah. I know
But
nothing,
I'm talking about the background checks and the multiple layers of things that have to be done.
Sure.
You can find some of the folks that service that may run out and do something real quick out there. But those employees that work on those sites, they're pretty, that intellectual property that they're trying to protect, they put a ton of resources into making sure the people that are out there should be out there.
Makes
Can I
sense.
quickly add
Please.
an addendum? I was not saying that fraud is going to be a major concern. What I'm saying is that as you reach out to a new electorate, an electorate that has not been contacted, that a very complicated situation can present itself. And we know that there are a number of people who may be citizens, permanent residents, and undocumented in the same families or family circles.
right.
So I'm talking about the complicated path to enfranchisement, but not as fraud.
That's
I'm
right.
talking about the networks that they want to mobilize.
In the normal
and
course of things,
finding
that's
these
right.
folks agreeing with a Republican agenda.
That's right. Good points there. Out of time for our election talk this week. We'll be back with this group to discuss the role of lobbyists at the Roundhouse, and whether it's time to professionalize New Mexico's legislators. Now, after the break, what's in a word? We talk socialism with an expert.